Annyeonghaseyo! Welcome to Afternoona Delight. We're Leah, Megan, and Amy, romance novelists and your K-romance guides. So grab some tteokbokki and listen to your new favorite unnies.
Annyeonghaseyo! As you may be able to tell, we are not Leah, Megan, or Amy, but instead you have myself and my co-host, Grace. And we've taken over for a guest edition of Afternoona Delight. And the girls are really trusting us because they've not even seen this script. And we've both just, I think, screwed up this kind of annyeonghaseyo that we were trying to say, like, simultaneously. So this could all be a bit of a hot mess. So any screw-ups are completely due to me and Grace. So please excuse those. And thank you, Afternoona Nooners, for the faith you have in us guys. So in this episode, what we're hoping to do is introduce ourselves, talk a little bit about our background, how we came to K-dramas, and hopefully answer a few questions that have come up in our K-drama viewing. And what we'd like to come back and do this regularly with some new topics and potentially launch a sister pod that will answer some of the many questions that come up during our K-drama watching. And they might be big and thematic questions like how patriarchal Korean society is and how that affects like the lives of women, or what is the deal with studying so hard that your nose bleeds, and what does all this studying do for your mental health for Korean people?
To smaller ones like, does blowing on a wound really help heal your little boo-boo? Or does it only work when your oppa is doing it to you? Also, what is with people involved in workplace romances calling each other CEO and assistant manager in more intimate settings? We'd love to hear your feedback on this episode and any questions you might have. Do you want to hear more from us? What topics would you like to hear covered? You can email us at the main Afternoona Delight email, which is afternoonadelightpodcast@gmail.com.
Yay! But so first, let's introduce ourselves to you. So for Chinese speakers, 大家好。我是Sarah. My name is Sarah. I post on Instagram and Twitter under @KDrama_this. And I also write a review blog at www.kdramadis.com. And I've been lucky enough to guest host on the Afternoona podcast a few times now, namely for Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha, King's Affection, 2521, Extraordinary Tiny Woo, and hopefully soon, or it might have already dropped by the time you listen to this one, Moon Lovers Scarlet Heart Rio, which I did with Leah. And apologies to those who may have already heard this when I covered it in the very first pod that I did, but my background, brief bio from me. So I'm British born Chinese. My parents are from Hong Kong. And I currently live in Cambridge with my husband and two kids. And growing up, I watched a ton of Hong Kong dramas and listened to loads of Canto pop. So I was lucky to grow up bilingual in English and Cantonese. At university, I decided I want to major in Chinese. So I also learnt Mandarin. I learnt to read and write, and I spent a year studying in China. And in the past, I've worked as a journalist with Reuters, which I think I mentioned on the 2521 podcast that I did with Megan, who's also an ex-journalist. And now I work part-time for the university in Cambridge. So like the Nooners, I discovered K-dramas in a big way during COVID lockdown. My gateway drama was the same as theirs, which was Crash Landing on You. And very similar to them, that was, the gateway down the rabbit hole. And since then, I've watched barely any Western dramas and consumed nearly only K-dramas. I've watched a few Chinese dramas, but until Love Between Fairy and Devil, which the Nooners have just done a deep dive on and loved, I've not found ones that grip me as much, which is kind of a shame because I'd really love to keep using my Mandarin. But since finding the whole Dongfang Qingchang love, I am now up for any comps for this drama. So if you have them, ping us. And I'm always open to rec, so feel free to message me via my social media channels anytime.
And my name is Grace. I do not post regularly on any socials, and I have not been a guest on any of the regular Afternoona podcasts. But listeners have probably heard my name mentioned, as I have occasionally corrected pronunciations, commented on translations, and suggested Go Back Couple to the Noonas for one of the podcast episodes. I'm Korean American, originally from Southern California, and now living in Northern California with my husband and 2 kids. And I unfortunately did not study Korean in college. I was a biology pre-med major, like Nadine from Singles Inferno 2, turned political science pre-law student. After law school, I worked as an attorney for about 4 years before quitting to be a stay-at-home mom. Now that my kids are in school most of the day, I am thinking about going back to school to be a children's librarian.
Like Amy.
Like Amy. So I should probably talk to her about it. She might not. I mean, I'm probably overly idealizing it, but I like the idea. Anyway, I actually grew up, or sort of grew up watching K-dramas, but I rediscovered them in about 2017 after a non-Korean American friend of mine and I had a conversation about all the K-pop and K-dramas he had gotten into and how he was learning Korean. Shout out to Robert if he ever listens to this. And then the pandemic kicked the obsession into high gear. I feel really lucky that my Korean seems to have gotten a little bit better as a result of watching all of the K-dramas, though it is still very far from good. So if I say something wrong, please feel free to correct me. Yeah, it's really, I grew up speaking and hearing a lot of Korean, so my pronunciation is pretty decent, but my grammar is terrible. So if I told my Korean American friends and family that I go around correcting Korean pronunciations and translation, they would probably have a good laugh. But anyway, we're all learning, and hopefully I can help with some of the Korean, even though mine isn't the greatest.
So I heard like Korean grammar is it pretty difficult?
It is. It's kind of the opposite of English grammar. So it's totally flipped around. So anyone who's dabbled in learning a little bit of Korean, that is one of the stumbling blocks for sure. Just trying to figure out how to put together a sentence in a way that sounds natural, which is not my specialty. So yeah,
it's really interesting because actually Chinese is the opposite. Like Chinese grammar is so super simple, especially things like verbs. Like if you've learned any European languages and you have to learn how to conjugate things and learn the feminine and masculine terms of this, that, and the other. But Chinese grammar is really straightforward. So it's actually mainly the writing system. And to a certain extent, the pronunciation that's like really puts people off, I think. Anyway, that went off a bit of script, but it was interesting to hear.
So Sarah, what's your Afternoona Delight origin story? How did you discover the pod, and when did you start listening?
So I'm a huge historical romance fan, which I think I mentioned in the Kings of Fiction podcast. And it's my go-to genre. And one of my favorite authors in the genre is Sarah MacLean, who is also the author Sarah MacLean. So she's one half of a podcast called Fated Mates, which Leah has mentioned a few times, and is a really great podcast for other people looking for romance writing podcasts. But she also has a Facebook group called, I think it's the Old School Romance Book Club, the OSRBC is how it gets abbreviated to. And there's a subgroup of that which got formed called OSRBC Asian Dramas. So actually Crash Landing on You was recommended by a film producer friend of mine. So shout out to Yi Liu for sending me down this rabbit hole. I'm very grateful. But there was also posts on the Facebook group about this drama and then signposting to this subgroup. So I went on there to find other people that had become so obsessed with Crash Landing like I had. And it's where I found all the Noonas. And I found Megan's rec of I Am Not a Robot. And I absolutely freaking love I Am Not a Robot. If anyone follows me on Instagram, I've been like massively posting about it because I just did a rewatch of it and it was so satisfying. But anyway, the hosts are all on there. They're being pretty modest about their podcast rather. So every now and then they went through. They don't do this anymore actually. They're since now they're so successful. No, they don't do this so much anymore. But they used to kind of go on comment and go, "Oh, we actually just did this podcast episode on this, topic." Like if you want to have a listen, here's the link. Anyway, so I went on there and I looked it up, and then I was like, "Oh my god, this podcast is for me," because it's romance writers talking about K-dramas, and they had not one but two entire episodes where they just talked about Gila. They talked about mole hair. They sung to My Court Learns to Rock. And I was like, I'm in. This is my podcast. This is like, I found my people because I have no one in real life to talk to about K-dramas and everybody thinks I'm nuts. And I think they started unfollowing me because I was just on Facebook going like, guys,
oh no,
watch this drama. It's really amazing. Anyway, so then I became a patron when that launched. And honestly, it's just like my happy space now. I feel like all these people I have never met in real life are my friends. So anyway, so what about you? In fact, you've done an in real life meet, right? Just recently.
I did, yes.
So jealous.
Although it was for Afternoona Army, and I wasn't Army before the meetup, but I became Army after. Because we watched the BTS concert in Busan, yet to come, was on the big screens, and so a few of us met up. Leah and Megan from the Afternoona Army podcast were among the people I met up with. But now we're always talking about BTS, and we formed a Kakao Talk group chat, and we send each other BTS stickers and things like that. It's so fun.
I think it's so hilarious. You've become I mean, I was crazy because I went to go and see Yet to Come at the cinema. I missed it because I got COVID at the main release, so then I had to go all the way into the next town along to go and see this viewing in the middle of what is traditionally children's bedtime, so I had to get a favor off my husband. But anyway, I went alone because I don't know anybody who is remotely Army that is local to me. Anyway, so I posted about it on Instagram, and Leah was like, "Come and be Army," and I was just like, I can't, because honestly, I see you guys and you freak me out. How much time? And then she's like, no, but you can do it moderately. Amy does it moderately. You don't have to become as insane as me. And I was just like, well, yeah, it's kind of happening organically. So probably is going to be.
True.
It will happen. It will happen one day, I think. Anyway, so what's your origin story?
Okay. So I found Afternoona Delight through Facebook too. It actually started with another Facebook group I'm in for an organization called BAN, the Black and Asian Alliance Network. Back in 2020, I posted about diverse romance novels in that group and mentioned that I also love K-dramas. And somebody dropped a recommendation for the OSRBC Asian Dramas group in the comments. So I joined, and I saw one of the Noonas post, like you said, they did early on about a podcast there. And so I listened, and then I listened to all of the episodes that had already dropped. And it was pretty early on. I think maybe 6 episodes had dropped at that point. So I've been a super fan since, and I became a patron on their Patreon as soon as that started too. And I agree. It really is a group of friends I've never met, and it's really wonderful to connect over a love of Asian dramas, because because talking to people you meet in real life about liking dramas is almost always the worst, most awkward mistake. I recently struck up a conversation with a fellow kindergarten mom at a birthday party, and I mentioned that I was watching Love Between Fairy and Devil, and she just looked at me like, I have no time for this. It was really, I was like, oh yeah. Okay, this is not normal. I can't bring this up in regular conversation.
That is so funny. Well, it reminds me of like I felt like I did like this cultural thing, that like white people do to sometimes to minorities, of just assuming because you're like the minority that you just represent everything that you love about their culture. But anyway, I did that because I went to Korea, and I was lucky enough to be had a colleague who was gonna like kind of showing me around. And I was just like talking to her about K-dramas, and I was just like, I just kind of assumed that she watched them. And then like after a while of me going like, like just like info dumping like about K-dramas on her, she's like, yeah, I don't really watch them. And I was like, oh, I feel really stupid.
I know. I mean, I totally understand because I got to Love Between Fairy and Devil from like this conversation about how they speak Mandarin at home, and I was like, oh, I'm watching something in Mandarin right now. It's like, okay, I'm sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh dear. Anyway, so I also thought it would be quite good for us to have a little chat about how we watch dramas growing up, because I certainly found it interesting, and in a way we're like we're products of our generation, right, Grace? Because we're kind of old.
Yeah.
So we're a similar age. So I'm not dissing Grace. I'm not saying like no, we are similar age. So I'm just saying that this is who we are. And I actually realized, even though I'm British Chinese and Grace is Korean American, that we actually had a real similar experience, despite being on opposite sides of the world, about how we kind of, as a diaspora, went and kind of got our fix of our own culture, or basically our parents did. But yeah, our experience is really old school, and it's properly old because it's VHS tapes. So we got our VHS tapes from this, and I think you were definitely the same, because we chatted about this. We got our VHS tapes from this tiny Chinese grocery store in this really tiny, small English market town I grew up in. And if you're watching a series that's super long, which like a lot of Chinese dramas are, as people who watch Chinese dramas nowadays know, it could go up to like 60 tapes, right? And if you return the ones you've watched, but someone else had the next set of episodes, you're just screwed, right? You just have to wait until somebody's returned those tapes. So yeah, it's the same for you, right? What kind of shows did you watch back in those VHS days?
Yes, almost exactly the same, except for our video store was actually a separate kind of hole-in-the-wall store next to what was then a very small Zion market in San Diego. And I started watching probably in middle school and early high school. And my mom would get, I think, about 8 to 10 tapes at a time. So those were my first experiences binge watching shows. Like, we would be popping in tape after tape and bawling our eyes out into the wee hours of the night.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. The titles I remember from that period were like Moreshige 1.5, which is 1.5 generation. Autumn in My Heart, and Winter Sonata. Then there was this one about a girl who was switched at birth, who was trying to make it as a designer at a shoe company that actually belonged to her birth family, I think. And then, back then, every drama had a very central amnesia and or cancer and or switched at birth plotline. And the mellows were way more tragic, like somebody like loses an eye, or like, many more not happily ever after endings than happy ones. At least that's what I recall. Or maybe it's like the trauma of like crying over the ones that were not happy in the end that just stuck with me. Anyway, I also watched those super long, 60 episode dramas. Like, there was this family drama that I watched that was my first introduction to a Black Korean actor, and I remember being so impressed, like, wow, like, he's Korean, like, he sounds Korean, even though like and I didn't know that existed back in the day, and I still wonder about him. And the reason I'm mentioning it is just so in case anybody remembers that, they can like tell me about this actor, because I wonder about like how he's doing in life now, because he was really cute too.
Oh yeah, so email the podcast if you know what Grace is talking about, guys. We need to hunt this guy down. We should bring him on for an interview. That would be really fun.
Yeah. That would be great. But do you remember any of the C-drama titles from growing up, or like the snippets of plots like I do?
Yeah. I mean, they sound quite similar. We definitely had a lot of amnesia and cancer plots growing up. That seems to be like an Asia drama thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm lucky because all the best Cantonese dramas, and I'm not biased, this is genuinely how people feel about Cantonese dramas. It was like a golden period of Hong Kong dramas that I was lucky enough to catch as a child watching growing up. And it was like a real golden period for Hong Kong dramas. Famous actors that you might have heard of from this time are Chow Yun-fat, Tony Leung, who was recently in Shang-Chi, the Marvel movie, and Leslie Chung, who gets name dropped a lot, actually, all come from this era. Michelle Yeoh, obviously, who has been winning, and hopefully he's going to win the Oscar for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. So all of that stuff, all of these actors, they really cut their teeth in this era. So, and the influence of Hong Kong drama really came into Asia, I think. And actually, it's been fun for me to kind of appreciate it from a Korean drama perspective, because they have a lot of cultural references in shows like Reply in 1988, where they all crowd around the TV to watch this famous Hong Kong movie and sing its theme tune in Cantonese, which I thought was really fun. So that was A Better Tomorrow, and it's very imaginative titled sequel, A Better Tomorrow 2, directed by the very famous John Woo. And then also there's a scene in My Mister where the brothers live out this fantasy life of dressing up as Hong Kong actors with their like black sunglasses and suits. But my deepest memories are probably for the historical what we'd call wuxia dramas. So they are all based on an author called Jingrong or Gamyong, who wrote the original books, and there've been like multiple versions of this. There's probably been like 6 or 7 remakes of these dramas. They do them like every generation. They'll get like the new hottest actors and remake the drama. But you know, for me, the classics are obviously the ones I watched when I was growing up. So there were things like The Legend of the Condor Heroes, which is Se Diu Ying Hong Jun, or The Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber, which is Yi Tin To Long Gei. So these are kind of like classic dramas for those of us who grew up watching Chinese wuxia. And then very similar shows to current K-dramas. So rom-coms, legal dramas, police procedurals, variety shows, music shows. So we had stuff like American Idol way before American Idol or it was a thing, and big event shows like shows for Chinese New Year, etc. And then I think Japanese dramas had a mini heyday. So a massive drama, I think I was chatting to Grace about this when I was young, was this really epically long historical drama charting the life of a young Japanese woman, which in Cantonese was called Asun. And then it charted her life from when she was young to old. And this was like huge in Asia. Like everybody was watching it. I actually went to Google it, and it's called Oh Shin. And it's one of the country's most watched serials of all time. It's aired in 68 countries. Did you ever watch this one, Grace?
I didn't. I actually, and I don't have any recollection of that plot, so I'm pretty sure I did. But it sounds fascinating. I love multi-generational sagas and stories like that. So it would totally be up my alley if it became available. I don't know if it is anywhere though, right?
You might have to look it up. It's properly tragic though. Like it's properly Asian. Everything that's terrible happens to this character.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, Korean dramas is now the thing, right? So Hallyu has it's the Hallyu way has not just come to Western shores, it's definitely in Asia. So loads of Hong Kong people I know rubbish what is produced in Hong Kong. They really love Korean dramas. I know from my Japanese friends that it's really huge in Japan. So Grace, are you able to tell us a bit more about how Koreans watch their own K-dramas? Because do they binge them all on Netflix the way we do?
That's actually a pretty good question, because I don't know. I don't know. My guess is that yes, they do. At least the younger generation. And this is just what I'm picking up from the conversations that I've seen on Physical 100 and Singles Inferno about Singles Inferno, the first Singles Inferno. So I think Netflix is actually getting pretty big.
Yeah.
But I haven't been back to Korea since 2013, and a lot has changed in the past decade. So I'm really not sure. I do recall from my childhood summer visits that sometimes the adults would watch dramas after the evening news. And based on depictions in current K-dramas like Chairman Grandpa in Business Proposal, it seems like regularly scheduled programming still is a common way for older adults to watch these dramas. But, like I said before, I wouldn't be surprised if all the younger people get their content through streaming platforms, just like you said that your kind of companion and guide doesn't watch Korean dramas. So you didn't really get into that, or did you ask?
Well,
anyway?
so she didn't really watch dramas, but her boss did. So her boss is the one actually came to Cambridge. So he's a professor at the SNU. So I was like, well, that's a guy from SNU's coming to. Anyway, yeah, like obviously we talked about work, but then at some point, obviously, I just had to kind of pin him and tell him about how much I love K-dramas. And like a few sentences in, he was like, "This is not the conversation I thought I'd be having in Cambridge." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not the academic that's going to talk to you about, like industrial strategy, which is kind of what my day job involves." Anyway, it turns out that he is a fan, so he does watch K-dramas, and he watches them of an evening as well. So I think he does watch them live, but definitely something Grace and I both want to do is bring on people on the podcast for us to ask all of these questions too. So we're not just relying on Grace to kind of like represent all Koreans.
Yes, because yes, I'm definitely not representative. Even among Korean Americans, it's like, we've all had different experiences, and but although my Korean American friends who watch dramas, they all watch on Netflix and Viki and things like that too. And I have heard though that some people who speak better Korean or who have parents living with them use on-demand Korea because it gives access to even more content, including news and documentaries. But my mom shares my Netflix and Viki accounts for her K-drama viewing, and my dad just watches synopsis videos on YouTube that like condense all 16 episodes into 1 hour.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a very different viewing experience, but I guess that works for him.
I found that fascinating. I remember when I was read it, I was like, what does he get from watching? Like, does it mean that he can like chat about with his friends, but doesn't have to actually go through the 16 hours of like K-drama watching? I find that so interesting.
Yeah. Maybe it's to chat about it with my mom, but the way he explained it to me was that, my mom is very disciplined. She can watch 1 episode per night and turn it off.
Wow.
But my dad is like, no, I would just watch it straight through the night and not sleep and not do anything. So I need to do it this way. Otherwise, it will take over my life. And so I'm like, so I take after my dad more, I guess.
That's a kind of, okay, that's a healthy way to approach. Maybe we should all be doing that, Maybe
but it's not as enjoyable.
It's really not, is it? It's not where the joy is. Yeah, definitely. So anyway, so what we've kind of covered this earlier, but we'll talk a little bit more about what this pod is going to be about. So basically it's an idea. I was really excited to be asked by Leah if I had any ideas for an additional podcast. And as you all know, and Grace has mentioned, there is actually a sister podcast to the Afternoona Delight podcast, which is Afternoona Army, which is going great guns. And, you know, in my baby steps I'm still trying to avoid being Army, but I am gradually being joined into the net. So I have been listening to some of the 101 podcasts and the Bangtan University. So if you are in any way like me, Army curious, then I can recommend the pod, because the guys, I mean, they know a lot, right? They know so much,
so much.
And it's but it's really fun. Anyway, so we also have ambitions to be a sister pod, and this is kind of a little tester episode for both us as presenters and also you guys as listeners. And what we want to do with this pod is, because we both really love lots of so there's done lots of podcasts where they ask lots of questions, right? And I have lots and lots of questions. And I feel like I learn a lot about Korean culture and history and things from watching K-drama, but it often leaves me with lots of questions. So, for example, when they did like the podcast where they talked about Reply 1988, and they talked about why bananas are so expensive in Korea in 1988, I love that. Like, I'm just a bit of a funny geek with stuff like that. So anyway, that's an extension of that, but we also want to feature Asian owned voices. So I would love to speak to, you know, because I know, for example, Korean drama is so huge in like the Philippines and in Indonesia and other parts of Asia, and I would just really love to speak to, you know, listeners, K-drama fans from other countries in Asia, to kind of hear what their experiences are. And also we will be doing, so I'm recording a podcast, another one with our two guest hosts for this part 2 of Extraordinary Attorney Woo, who spoke about the autistic portrayal. So an autistic's own voices section of the podcast. But for this one, I was really keen to get Grace on board, obviously, as she's Korean American, and we have our own Asian voices on this topic.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really, really excited that you thought of me, and I'm grateful that you asked me to be on, because I also really enjoyed the We Have Questions episodes, and I generally really, really love the deep dive episodes on, the early ones where it was like 2 whole episodes on various dramas and things like that. Yeah. And the Extraordinary Attorney Woo podcast also, there was 2 episodes, one where we heard from autistic K-drama viewers, and from you too, since you have experience with an autistic family member. And I am also kind of a funny geek. So I really appreciate the podcast where I get to learn backstories, context, personal experiences, fun facts, and all of those things. And I thought it was really cool. Your idea to have Asian-owned voices was really cool also, because I feel like, Asian viewers, Asian diaspora viewers, pick up different things when we watch these Asian dramas than maybe Western viewers do. And so I think it'd be really great to, share those kinds of observations and experiences of watching dramas from a place of kind of more cultural familiarity and also personal discovery. Yeah. What I mean by personal discovery is that, some of us, like me, very much so, diaspora Asians didn't always identify with our Asianness as much as with the country and culture we were raised in. It may not be like an overt pressure, but there's always this kind of underlying pressure to assimilate. Yes. So, I grew up thinking of myself primarily as an American. Now, at the ripe old age of 39, I am kind of rediscovering my, Korean cultural identity. So it's really exciting for me to have this additional impetus to dig more deeply into my own heritage. And yeah, just talk about things that I learned from these dramas. So after Sarah reached out to me more on how this all got started, we had a chat to brainstorm and plan. And some of the topics we discussed in our first meeting were about maybe doing one episode about filial piety and Confucianism, or feminism in South Korea, the South Korean legal and education systems, adoption and family separation, and also the K entertainment industry. So those are some of our ideas for future episodes. And as Sarah mentioned before, we are hoping to bring on some guests or guest hosts who have a bit more direct knowledge on the topics we will investigate. For example, as I mentioned before, once upon a time I was a lawyer. And I went to a large law school with a big international LLM program. An LLM is a legal master's program that people who are already lawyers attend to get training in some specialized area of law or to extend their professional network. And that school happened to have a rather sizable Korean contingent whom I did not keep in touch with. However, I hope that, if I reach out, that somebody who is also, a fan of dramas will be gracious enough to come and share with us like their views on the depictions of law practice in Korean dramas.
Great. That would be so good. I have a lot of questions about Korean law.
Me too.
So that would be, I know it sounds really weird, but that would be really fun.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I feel like I should hear this, like, that Afternoona Delight, like theme music playing for this bit now. Anyway, so learn Korean section. So in the main podcast, as you know, they have their favorite part, which is the K-pop record of the week. So on here, because we're a little bit more nerdy, obviously, we're going to have a learn Korean section.
Yay!
And as obviously I don't speak Korean, I'll be the one who's trying to learn the word and mispronounce it. Yay! So so you don't have to feel embarrassed. If you get to do it in the car, I have to do it on live on this pod. So I wanted to do two things. One is for us all to learn one Korean word per podcast, so we can all very gradually get to know some Korean. And the second idea for me was to nail the pronunciation of some common words or actors' names in Korean, which we probably, in fact, definitely mangle. So on that, I'm going to start with asking about one of our favorite oppas who was featured heavily in early Afternoona Delight podcasts, and that's Ji Chang Wook. And so we are probably mangling his name. So how should we be saying it, Grace? Is it Wook or
It's Wook. Actually, it's Ji Chang Wook. Ji Chang Wook.
Ji Chang Wook.
Yeah. So I should also, Wook is difficult. But also I should mention that there is no hard A sound in the Korean language. So the second syllable is chang, like aha, chang, not chang like bang. Yeah. And so, actually, the fact that there's no hard A sound is something that you can see in dramas sometimes. Like recently, I watched Love to Hate You. So there's a character in that drama whose name is Grace. And you hear them say, Grace, 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 which is actually the way that my relatives refer to me and call me, because I never responded to my Korean name, which is Eunhae, and also means grace. So they always said Grace, and that's because there is no A sound, it's E. So if you run it together real fast, it's Grace, Grace, and so you sort of get that A, but there's no A, like hard a like single sound in Korean. So again, Ji Chang Wook. Ji
Ji
Chang Wook.
Chang Wook. Is that okay?
Mhm.
Ji Chang Wook.
Very good. Ji
Yay!
Chang Wook. Yay!
That's cool.
Wait. While we're at it, will you give Dongfang Ching Sung? That last syllable in particular is really hard.
It is, and it's also not helped by like Chinese, unlike Korean, the standard way of writing Chinese is standardized, right? So as long as you learn pinyin, which is the romanization of Chinese characters and sounds, they're all regular. So you will always spell particular characters in the same way. So unlike Korean, where you seem to have like lots of different ways to spell like the same word. But it does mean that they kind of took some words like Q's and Z's and made them a very specific Chinese pronunciation, and you kind of have to learn it in order to get it right. So that's why it's quite confusing, because I don't think those of us who read Western characters look at a Q and kind of want to, make it a like a Western sound of it. But actually, my tip, so Dongfang I think is pretty straightforward. So Dongfang, so Dong means east, Fang means region. So Dongfang means he comes from the east with them. So Dongfang is his surname. And the second two words are Qing Chang. So Qing is, so I would recommend you just think of it as Ching. So Qing, it means clear, and Chang means to hide. And Chang is Chang, yeah, Qing Chang. So that's kind of, similar to, so again, I would kind of like think of it as Chang almost. So it's a little bit easier, but take away a little bit more of the H. So Qing Tang. Anyway, so there you are. But you could say it really quickly. Try saying it.
Yeah.
All right. Or I was listening to.
I mean, yeah, there's like tones also that I'm sure apply here that you kind of elide over if you say it quickly, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, I would say for anyone who's learning Mandarin and like, because so Mandarin has 4 tones, Cantonese has 9, so it's even crazier, but Mandarin has 4 tones. But I would just say, like, if you're learning, most Mandarin speakers can get what tone you mean from the context of your word. So even if you mangle it, and I mangle my tones quite a lot, and obviously I have a very Cantonese accent when I'm speaking Mandarin because Cantonese is my mother tongue, so I would just say, like, if you are learning Mandarin, just ignore the tones. Don't ignore them tones, but don't worry too much about getting them like spot on, because most native speakers will understand what you're trying to say from your context.
That sounds good.
Cool.
Thank you.
Anyway, so no, thank you. So that was really fun. I feel like I can now try to say Ji Chang Wook. So the new word of the day, since we're asking lots of questions, I thought we could start with the word for question in Korean, an example of how we might use this.
Okay, so the word for question in Korean is 질문. And 질문. And do you have a question would be 질문 있으세요? Or 질문 있습니까? And there are different levels of like politeness and honorifics based on to whom you are speaking. And I am not super good at them. But both of these are pretty polite. So yeah, 질문 is question, and 질문 있으세요 or 질문 있습니까 is how you ask, do you have a question?
It's so nice hearing you speak Korean, Grace. You've got such a nice sounding voice. It's so lovely. Anyway, so hopefully you guys have learned how to say Ji Chang Wook's name properly and know how to say the word question, even if you can't.
질문. Mm-hmm. Oh, and so one thing that that I learned not too long ago, but I think it really helps with explaining how to pronounce Korean, is there's a lot of aspirated consonant sounds. So breathing through a lot of the pronunciation actually increases like how well like good your pronunciation is. So you can say Ji Chang Wook, Ji Chang Wook, doesn't sound as Korean as Ji because you like breathe through that J sound. Ji Chang Wook.
Ji Chang Wook.
Ji Chang Wook. So if you like breathe through it, because
Then it
those
goes better,
consonants are often aspirated, it
Ah.
sounds like better Korean.
You know what? It's also really funny. It's like I was thinking, like, you know how like in Singles Inferno 2, where Nadine's, you know, she switches from like English to Korean, and she says in her introduction how people always say that she sounds more cute in Korean. I don't know if you thought that, but I was wondering whether or not it's partly this kind of this aspirated, like consonant kind of effect, because actually English is pretty like tonally, I think, quite hard. Even though I think American English is softer than say British English. But definitely compared to Korean, that it sounds more kind of, more gentle.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have noticed that, you know, the Korean spoken with an American accent, it often has less of that aspirated sound.
Yeah.
And that's how kind of you can pick up on, oh, that person is like
Korean American,
not a native Korean speaker. And actually, like in the BTS like chat room, we we discussed how like there are times when like the members will put on like an Americanized Korean accent, or put on like a Busan Saturi or whatever, and like they basically kind of just drop the aspiration a little bit from their Korean, and then it sounds like, you know, they have American accented Korean a little bit more. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I mean, I would love to hear like that language from it. I mean, I did think, because when I was sitting there listening to the Yet to Come, I was feeling like I was congratulating myself slightly, because whenever they did drop into the Busan accent, I was like, I know that accent. Like, I know, I can recognize it now. Like, I've come on. Right. Okay. So the rest of the pod, I thought it'd also be fun to do a bit of a get to know us via our drama taste section. So I set this homework, not realizing actually that the homework sounded fun, but was actually really hard to do. So I was slightly regretting setting this question, because I was like, oh my God, like, why did we ask this? Anyway, so the homework that I set, Grace and I set myself, was to name 5 dramas that represent us and represent our K-drama tastes. So they don't have to be your top 5. They're just 5 dramas to know me. And I thought at the time, hey, isn't that fun? And then I sat down to do my 5, and I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. So, you know, oftentimes I'm listening to the Noonas do their podcast. I always like sit there and think, oh, I love this question. Like, I would like to be able to answer this question. So you guys, you know, like post, you know, if you're in the Patreon, post in the Patreon, or like on my Instagram, like 5 dramas to get to know you. You will realize how flipping hard it is. So anyway, my 5 are My Mister, Healer, I Am Not a Robot, Love Between Fairy and Devil, and One Spring Night. So I think firstly you can tell that I love my romance, because all of them are romance heavy, other than obviously My Mister. But I guess the other things, so the dramas, other than My Mister, the dramas that I think tell you about my romance are just romance things that tick my box. So I love angst in a romance. So I think this is partly why I don't find lots of C-dramas that appealing these days, because I find them quite light. So I think some people really love an angst-free drama. I'm not. I love my angst in drama. So for example, I'm Not a Robot, which starts light, gets really emotional, gets really angsty, it really twists my heart, and I love all of that. I also really love a black moment in romance. That's when, you know, like right at the end, when it feels like all hope is gone, and the couple are not going to get together, and you know, it's not going to happen. I love those moments. I love them done really, really well. And I think that all the 4 that I've picked have a moment when they've had a taste of how amazing they could be together, and then for reasons they can't be together, and then there's this black moment when it all seems lost and gone. And I think these 4 dramas do it really well. I also love a hero who thinks they don't need anyone else, like they're an island and they don't have feelings, they don't need emotions. So this is obviously Healer. It's Dongfang Qingtang and Kim Min-kyu. And then along comes a heroine to prove them all wrong. And in One Spring Night, the hero himself has convinced himself that because of his own situation, so he's a single dad, and because of his history, he doesn't deserve love. So it's a similar setup until obviously the heroine walks into his pharmacy, and then all things change. And then I also love a scene where they communicate at a fundamental heart-to-heart level and tell each other how they really feel. There's lots of that in I Am Not a Robot, which I love. There's one on the bridge for the bridge scene in Love Between Fairy and Devil. Absolutely
so
kills
good.
me. It's so good. And I just love it when the walls have come down and they're completely open and vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for me, and My Mister was a surprise drama for me. So I started it when I was finally in the mood for it, because I know it's one of those dramas that everybody says is amazing. And I was like, it's on my watch list for ages, but I knew I had to be in a good mood for it. Or the right mood, not a good mood, right mood for it, because I knew it was going to be kind of bleak. And obviously it's not a romance, it's slow and dark, but I just think it's genius. I think it's beautiful, multi-layered, amazingly acted, actually ultimately amazingly healing. And I know that although the Noonas didn't really like this drama, and like Megan actively hates it, but both me and Grace really love My Mister. So actually one day I think we should do like a deep dive on like the deep dive My Mister should have had but never did.
Yes, we definitely should do a whole other My Mister deep dive to provide an alternative view for those, because it's a little bit of a bummer when you're listening and you love a drama, and so hopefully we can fill that bucket for for some of the listeners out there who loved My Mister also. So I actually didn't think that deeply. Sarah said, this was really hard homework, but I was just like, just pick 5 dramas. Mine are my comfort rewatch dramas. They are Reply 1988, Go Back Couple, which I am currently rewatching for like the 5th or 6th time. Seongyun Scandal, which is kind of like a Joseon era, like a sageuk version style of like Coffee Prince, kind of that it's that kind of a story. It's a gender swap type of thing. Strong Woman Do Bong-sun, and Cunning Single Lady. So one of the reasons I enjoyed these dramas so much is that they each have a pretty unambiguously happy ending and no major loose ends. So I find them really satisfying. And with the exception of Strong Woman Do Bong-sun, where the romance is really the standout part of the drama, and the secondary characters are a bit meh or really problematic. All of these other dramas have some really lovely slice of life elements with strong ensemble or supporting casts. I just love spending time with all of the characters. I actually almost swapped out Strong Woman for I Am Not a Robot, because I Am Not a Robot is similar in that it has a really good supporting cast, but I decided for the listeners I would not duplicate. So you have more options. As for the romance elements that really pull me in, I am a huge sucker for enemies to lovers plots. And within that, my favorites are second chance reconciliation romances. So Go Back Couple and Cunning Single Lady are great examples of that, where it's a couple, they have history, they broke up, and now we're like seeing them clear up the misunderstandings, grow personally, and then find their way back to each other. I love that. And then Seongyun Scandal has a lot of pure, like, glorious enemies to lovers and enemies to friends storylines. And then the second type of romance that I really like, which seems to be on the other end of the spectrum, is when the male lead is absolutely weak for the female lead from the very start. Like, because I really love like when the male leads just gaze at the female leads with all of that like adoration and respect and vulnerability and like heat from the get-go. Like no negging, no downplaying of the female lead's beauty or badassery, just absolutely like smitten kittens, you know. So Park Hyung-sik, or so Park Hyung-sik is actually Park Hyung-sik, is particularly good at giving this look, both in Strong Woman and in Happiness. His eyes are just like liquid pools of love every time, you know, he looks at, you know, the female lead.
That's so true.
Yes, he's so good. He's just
so
like,
good at
it's like,
that.
oh my gosh, it just melts me, honestly.
Have you seen soundtrack number 1?
I haven't, because I wasn't. I think it was it on Disney Plus or something?
Yeah, well, it took
but not
for ages to come in Disney Plus. So I've had it on Disney Plus only recently in the UK.
Yeah,
so it only came on recently for me, but it's only 4 episodes. But it's so this, like, he is.
Oh, okay. I have to watch it.
Yeah,
I have to watch it like this weekend.
Yeah,
no. I mean, it's like, because and this is like yeah, and it seems like these are like kind of opposite types of romances, but I find that it's really not uncommon in enemies to lovers stories for the male lead to be like giving this strong like look of love, this you know, 눈빛 to the female lead, except like they hide it, and it's only in moments where she's not looking where like it like really comes out, and it's like he gazes at her like, oh my goodness, you're the best. But either, you know, he's in denial, he's like, you know, won't admit himself that he has these feelings, or he's hiding it for one reason or another. But yeah, I love that look that just like gives away all of his feelings.
Cool. So I've never heard of Cunning Single Lady, actually, so I need to check that out. But
it's an old one.
It's an old one.
2013, I think, maybe.
Okay, cool. Sungguh-kwan's Scandal has definitely been on my list for a while, because that's like an early Song Joong-ki, Park Min-young drama, right?
Yes. And Song Joong-ki is like, he plays a really good character in it. He's a side character. He's not the male lead, but it's a really good ensemble cast too.
Cool. I will look at them up. So right, and I had a question for Grace. So how has it been for you to see the Hallyu wave grow and everyone be really mad for your culture and want to go to Korea and learn Korean, and everyone now knows Korean stars and K-pop and all of that, versus what it must have been like for you to grow up Korean American in America?
Yeah, it is really kind of strange and amazing. I mean, it isn't true that everyone is doing these things, like, because honestly, for the most part, I haven't seen people in real life, like in like day to day, like people I see face to face, be mad for my culture. So it hasn't really changed my interactions with like people I meet, but it's like I've seen it mostly as an online phenomenon. So it feels very much like a compartmentalized other world that I like get to step into when I go into these online spaces and connect with people over Korean food, dramas, music, you know, and other cultural things. But I mean, I have to say that the biggest benefit I've seen from the success of Hallyu is that Korean content is just so accessible now.
Yeah.
Like, if you need a recipe, there are like dozens, hundreds out there for like the same food item. There's probably tens of thousands of kimchi recipes online, you know, for example. And then like, if you want to listen to K-pop, it's not like some like weird special place you have to go. You just like on Spotify, and you know, it's all there. And dramas, there's lots of streaming platforms and apps and things like that. Also, if you want to brush up on your language, which you know, I I am currently taking classes because my grammar is so atrocious. But yeah. So there's lots of options for that too. There's like books and apps and tutors and Zoom classes. I'm doing a Zoom classes right now, like live ones. And it's all really been just such a wonderful change, because you're right. Growing up Korean American, I still remember like, playing in the playground with some kid in elementary school, and then my dad showing up to pick me up, and this girl looking at him and then looking at me and looking at him and saying like, why does your dad look so weird? And it was just, for the longest time I thought I had a weird looking dad.
Oh.
But I didn't. It was just, being Korean was weird. Being Asian was weird. And like, people didn't even know. I think, was it you that you sent me
a tweet?
Our Korean dad, Nick Cho's tweet about how nobody even knew what Korea was. People would ask you, are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? And that's where it ended. There was no other knowledge of like other Asian, countries. So yeah. Anyway, so it's a really great change. Because everything used to be hard. You had to go to specific stores to get content, or actually go to Korea to get items like CDs. Korean language classes were a thing that was basically only available if you went to a Korean American church, and then like you would have to stay after potluck for Hangul Hakgyo, and everybody hated it. And like, there was no such thing as like Korean recipes written in like English. There probably were recipes written in Korean, but like mostly you just like watch your parents and grandparents cook, and then like ask what the ingredients are, and like kind of put it together and hope that it was going to taste right, and be like, taste it throughout, and like add a little this, something's missing, that was how we cooked, but starting in like the late aughts with Mangchi's, YouTube videos, like, everything has come online, and everything is more accessible to those of us who are like mostly comfortable speaking, reading English. So yeah, it's I'm really grateful actually to Hallyu and to technology for giving me this easy access to my Korean culture.
Yeah, and for the rest of us to help for us to consume the Korean culture.
So actually, Hallyu means Korean wave already. So when we say Hallyu wave, we are saying Korean wave, which I sometimes do. I sometimes do too, but it's not a problem. But just so everyone knows, Hallyu itself is already Korean wave, and so we don't have to say Hallyu wave.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's interesting. I didn't know.
Yeah, I actually Googled it, and it like I think it actually came from Chinese people talking about how influential Korean content
I should look up the
had become. Yeah. It's on Wikipedia. Yeah. Okay, so question for you. Sometimes it can be hard for those of us who grew up with dual cultures to separate which part of us comes from this culture, which part of us comes from that culture. But what do you feel speaks to the Asian part of you when watching Asian dramas?
I think it's interesting for me, some of the scenes that really emotionally get to me. A lot of them are tied around filial piety, actually. So this is the Confucian notion of being respectful and of almost duty, and also putting your parents first and their well-being first in front of yourself. It's actually quite a complicated cultural thing to explain in some ways, because it bleeds into absolutely everything, and it's obviously one of those things that we're brought up I certainly was brought up to understand how important it was. And I think also, especially because we were immigrants in a country, I think my mum made special efforts to make sure that she really embedded this part of our culture in us, and also to understand how difficult immigrant life was, and how hard, especially because we saw so little of our dad. She made a real special effort to make sure that we understood how hard he was working, how we as children should pay back that love, which was to study hard and become, a doctor or a lawyer. So well done, Grace, by the way, for ticking the Asian American box. But yeah, for ticking that Asian immigrant dream. Like I kind of felt I didn't become either a lawyer or a doctor, or I married an accountant, so I did quite well on that score. But
I failed at the first attempt. The pre-med, no, didn't go anywhere.
You didn't become Nadine. But yeah. So all of that was really, so I think when it comes to dramas that really touch on this, and I think we had a chat, didn't we, about My Mister, and we're thinking that maybe part of the reason why the drama hit for me in a way that it might not have done for the Noonas was actually some of my own kind of cultural identity and appreciating that journey and that family and all of that obligation and the weight of that obligation on you as a person, on your life, really hit me. And it's interesting actually, because my mum watches a lot of K-drama too, but we have to spend quite a long time translating for each other, because she says the title to me in Chinese and then I have to try and translate it into English and then work out whether or not. But thankfully My Mister was very easy to translate, because they just translate it into anyway. So she loves the drama too, actually, and we had a bit of a chat about the character and why we liked it. So yeah, I think for me, definitely that part of it, that duty, that obligation, the Confucian kind of stuff that is definitely not part of what I consider my Western identity, because I'm so fight the patriarchy and
yes,
like individual rights,
so
and let's be a liberal and be a Democrat and all of those things. So that, I think that definitely is for me the difference. So I would like to go back to answering some of the questions that we posed at the start, Grace. So I loved your question. What is it with people involved in workplace romances calling each other CEO and assistant manager in more intimate settings?
So I didn't actually research this much, or at all. So I'm kind of just flying by the seat of my pants here. I am not an expert, but this is mostly kind of my sense of things. And it has to do with the fact that Korean society is very hierarchical. And it goes back to that Confucianism that is deeply rooted in Korean culture. There's a proper order and level of respect accorded to people of different ages, jobs, seniority, etc. You can see it being important in a lot of the introduction type scenes in Korean dramas, where people will ask right off the bat things like, what year were you born? What school did you go to? What year did you graduate? What is your occupation? What is your job title? And that's all to figure out kind of how to address a person with a proper level of respect. I think it's also because there isn't a super comfortable or natural or always polite way of saying you in Korean. Like in dramas, I have sometimes seen 그쪽, or that side, used and translated as you. Usually that's between strangers or people who are guarded or trying to make it clear that I don't want to have a relationship with you. You are, I'm trying to put distance here between us. And then sometimes the word for you might feel too familiar. Like 당신 is a word that couples call one another and use to say you to one another. But it's also a word that might be used to say you in a confrontational way. So if, even between strangers, on a street, if you get heated, you might call the other person 당신. Right. I'm not sure why that is, but it seems to be true. And then no is super informal. So it's you can really only use no to someone who's very, very close to you, with whom it's been agreed that all honorifics will be dropped, or with whom you have always had a relationship without honorifics, like a sibling or a childhood friend. The other option is literally saying the person's name every time you address them. So the other option is literally saying the person's name every time you address them. Like, would Sarah, she, or Sara, she, like to have lunch together with me? Like, you're talking to them, but you say their name to them. But even that might not be the most proper thing to call someone, if you know them in a context where there are other more appropriate titles.
Yeah.
So once the title or form of address or 호칭 has been designated, that becomes the default title used within that relationship. And it often takes a further conversation to change the titles, to drop titles or honorifics and honorifics once the relationship has evolved past, those titles and honorifics. And sometimes people will just do it spontaneously and then like be surprised and like, oh, okay, this sounds good. We're gonna drop the honorifics. And sometimes, they realize like, this is awkward. Let's have a conversation. What should we call each other? Like, and be more formal about it.
Oh.
So like you will hear it in dramas like 서로 말 놓을까요? Like that means literally to lower your speech, because the honorific is like higher.
Yeah.
And so to lower your speech. And sometimes in a super casual situation in a drama, I've seen characters say 말 까자, which means like to peel off the words. Like literally the literal words it sounds like cracking a nut or peeling something off, or opening something, but it also means let's be casual.
Yeah.
But the thing about office romances is that they usually start out as secret relationships.
Yeah.
So probably the CEO and the secretary or whatever, assistant manager, don't want to change their forms of address in private and then get in the habit of calling each other like 여보 or 자기 or whatever, and then slip and then say that in mixed company or in their place of work, and then have everyone be like, oh, I see what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that's why in a lot of the dramas for a very long time, you see the translation is like CEO, secretary,
Yeah.
but even though they're a couple.
That's so super interesting. So I hadn't realized about you. So that makes so much more sense, actually, because I can hear often they're using the titles or they're using a name, but then the translation in the English is just you. So yeah, that makes a lot. Thanks for that, Grace. That was really interesting. Hopefully you guys have a good idea of what we want to do with future episodes, and I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and looking forward to hearing more too. We welcome any questions or suggestions for topics. Have you got any burning issues you want to understand better? We don't need to just limit to K-dramas. If you have questions related to Chinese culture, we're happy to cover them too. And we also want to use our wider network, as well as our Patreon, to bring guests on and feature own voices as much as we can. And hopefully hear also from Koreans who are living in Korea now for some up-to-date info on all the many, many questions that we K-drama fans have about K-dramas.
Yes, absolutely. That last part, because I will once again say that I don't know everything, far from it. So we definitely welcome questions, suggestions, corrections, and just let us know what topics you're interested in. Maybe we won't know right away, how to answer in an in-depth way, but a part of the fun of and the draw of this for us is getting to reflect on and delve into things about our own cultures and experiences that maybe we took for granted or glossed over for much of our lives. So hopefully you all will enjoy joining us in deepening our understanding of the cultural context that these dramas we all love come out of.
Yay! So I was going to say, let's finish today's podcast by saying annyeong, like the way the Afternooners do. But can I just check, is that how you would say goodbye in Korean?
So this is how you would say goodbye if you were in a close relationship where you don't use any honorifics. So 안녕 would be, to a childhood friend, or like to your family members, or something like that. But if you wanted to match the greeting at the front end of the podcast, so 안녕하세요 is how you say hello.
Yeah.
You would say 안녕히 가세요 if the person is leaving.
Right.
Or 안녕히 계세요 if the person is staying and you're leaving.
Okay.
So 안녕히 가세요 or 안녕히 계세요.
But we're both leaving, right? We're leaving our listeners now. So what do we say?
But they're not going anywhere.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true. Okay.
So maybe we would say 안녕히 계세요.
안녕히 계세요. Okay, 안녕히 계세요.
Or we can just go 안녕 because it's so much easier. We can just go 안녕. We just through the process of this podcast, we have gotten to a level of familiarity where we can say 안녕 when we leave.
Yeah, that's so true.
We've gotten close. We're buddies now.
Okay, let's do that then. So actually, no, let's do it properly. I like it. I'm going to try and practice the proper way.
Okay.
Yeah.
안녕히 계세요.
So 안녕히 계세요. 계세요. Is it?
계세요.
계세요.
So it's like a G sound, but it's aspirated, so you have to breathe through it. 계세요. 안녕히 계세요.
안녕히
계세요.
안녕히 계세요.
Yay!
감사합니다. Thank you for listening to Afternoona Delight. Where can you find us outside the pod? Head on over to afternoonadelight.com. That's AFTERNOONADELIGHT.com. You'll find links to all our social media, our book recs, K-pop and K-skincare recs, and if you want even more Afternoona Delight, because really who doesn't, you can join our Patreon, where you can choose the patron level that's right for you. Join in daily K-drama conversations, listen to bonus podcast episodes just for patrons, and participate in our monthly live K-drama support group via Zoom. We can't wait for you to be a part of the community. Until next time, annyeong!